Welcome to the Law Club podcast presented by the Charles Houston Bar Association. On today's episode, we speak with immigration attorney Haregu Gaime about her practice, my obsession with the TV show 90 Day Fiance, and why you should never overstay your visa in the United States. We hope you enjoy this podcast, and please don't forget to subscribe to the Law Club podcast wherever you get your podcast. Thank you so much, and on to the episode. Good afternoon, and welcome to episode, I believe this is 8 of the Law Club podcast. My name is Nate Dunn. I'm an attorney at Ropers Majeski in San Francisco, and I'm here today with our guest Haregu Gaime, who I know from, she was a previous board member of the Charles Houston Bar Association. She is a solo practitioner. She practices immigration law in Oakland. Haregu, thank you so much for making time for us. It's a pleasure to be speaking with you today.
Yes, thank you very much. Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to talk to you.
Yes, and Haregu, so I want to start by talking a little bit about your background and how you first got motivated to pursue a career in the law. Can you tell us, when was the first time you decided, okay, I think I might want to go to law school?
I knew I wanted to be a lawyer, but I didn't know it took going to law school to become a lawyer. So I knew I wanted to be a lawyer in the 7th grade, just because that's when you start watching, Eyes on the Prize, and that's when you start to know the difference between what is needed and necessary and what justice means and who has it and doesn't have it. And I'm very adamant about right and wrong, and injustices and justice and people having access to someone who can help them. And so I knew I wanted to be a lawyer a lot earlier than I knew that I needed to go to law school. So I learned I needed to go to law school probably in high school, but I knew I wanted to be a lawyer in 7th grade.
Awesome. And did you always, I know that you practice immigration law now, when, and a lot of times when people talk or contemplate going into the law, they know that, they, like you said, they believe in right and wrong. They believe that they can be an advocate for people and help people. I think a lot of people there, when you're talking about making that decision in middle school, a lot of people think of lawyers as in terms of the criminal sense of defense attorneys or prosecutors. When did it kind of click over for you that you wanted to go into immigration law in particular?
Yeah, you know what? That was much later. That was probably when I was in law school. Like you said, when you're younger, especially for me, when we're talking about justice, you always think of just a criminal, a public defender or a DA, even differentiating that. I come from a background that doesn't have any lawyers. So my understanding and concept of what a lawyer was very limited. So in the beginning, that's what I wanted to do. In law school, however, I learned that there are, many different types of lawyers, environmental law, immigration, international business transaction, all types of law and lawyers. And so me becoming an immigration attorney or an attorney in immigration law was happenstance. I really thought I would definitely go into business transaction, international business transaction, or even the ICC, still in that, criminal section of the law. And then later on is my understanding of what a lawyer means or can be, and that there's, just variety types of lawyers and law. Then my expansion grew. And so in law school is when I learned that I could be an immigration attorney. And then when I became an immigration attorney is when I realized that's who I am. I don't think I don't think I began with that in my mind.
Yeah, and it's funny because many people these days their experience with immigration issues comes from a show like 90 Day Fiance or something like that, where they're always, you know, you've got these relationships that anybody watching can tell like this is out there. But in the background is this complicated issue of bringing a loved one from another country to the United States. And I'm sure that's a huge part of what you do, but also folks who are coming over here for work or for school and things like that. And I'm just wondering if you have anybody in your family or friends or community has dealt with a complicated immigration issue that either kind of helped guide you in this direction, or maybe you were able to help out with, or something like that.
That's an interesting question. You know, I'm an immigrant, and so I came here as a refugee. And because I was so young, I didn't know that I came here as a refugee. Or, I mean, not I didn't know. I wasn't ignorant to it, but I didn't know the nuances and the details of what it means to be, you know, an immigrant. So I think it's been a part of my life all the time, you know, going through the process. But for me, because I was a child, everything was being done for me, you know, or on my behalf. I wasn't the one struggling through it. I just kind of smoothly walked into everything that I was doing. And really, I'm from San Francisco. And so I went to San Francisco University High School, and I was a green card holder at that time. I didn't become a US citizen until I was finished with undergrad. A week after, sometime after graduation, September of 2001 is when I finally submitted my application for citizenship. And I was talking to some very good friends and saying, did you even know that I was not an American citizen? Because it just wasn't a part of my daily movement, but it was constantly with me. So it was something I always worked with, but not necessarily struggled with personally. Like I said, I'm very fortunate or ignorant because it was being done for me as a child.
That's fascinating, because so many people, when you're talking about, you know, either somebody who is trying to come here on their own, or somebody is here and trying to bring a loved one over, it's such an emotional process. And there's so many bumps along the way, like maybe a paper didn't get submitted, or maybe, you know, there's something on the checklist that they just can't get done, and it throws everything off, and these extended time frames. Do you think that what you described as, you know, the process that you went through, and, you know, maybe at the time you didn't realize that there were bumps along the way, or that this was so much going on behind the scenes? I guess my first question is, do you feel like because you went through it and it was such a central part of your story early on, that you feel that other people deserve, you know, a process similar to what you went through in terms of having this materialize? And also, was there anything that you learned after the fact that, wow, even though this happened and I got my citizenship, it was this close to not happening, or that it wasn't a sure thing that I was ever going to go through this?
You know, for me, like I said, because it was being done for me, but as we speak, this was a process from 1985 until 2001. That's a long time, right? And for someone like my mom, who was dealing with it, and this is, you know, her signing up with UNHCR as a refugee in Sudan. So for my mom, it was a very long time. My mom became a citizen a little bit before me. So I don't want anyone to necessarily go through what I went through, because it's really extreme. And you're right. I missed some of that stuff because, you know, parents shield their children, but I see it as an attorney. Yeah. So very recently, I just got my mom's documents through FOIA, which is the Freedom of Information Act. Yeah. And I saw her handwriting on those documents, and my mom is not you know, she's a US citizen and she's done so much and has really grown. But at that time, she had, you know, very limited education in her own language and really no education in the English language, but she hand wrote the application. So when I was looking at that, I really softened to my client's plight because, you know, it is complicated. It's not easy. So because I see it, you know, I'm a professional and I see mishaps happening all the time. So, and also immigration is so layered right now. Uh, One of the most complicated things is, you know, COVID has impacted uh, not just timelines, but also what access people have, you know? And so people are getting lost in the shuffle consistently because, you know, there is a battle between, you know, detaining clients or releasing clients. And when you release them, what do you release them with? You know, you release them without any information, without anywhere to go, without any guidance, without any support. And so they're lost in the shuffle. So, that's a great mishap because they don't know what they're supposed to do, but then they get targeted for not complying with what they should have done. But there's no mechanism at this time to ensure that they comply because they don't have access to the offices. The offices are closed. They don't know which office to go to. They're just kind of the doors open and they say go, and then but there's, you know, things you're supposed to comply with, which is check in. Who do you check in with? Where do you check in? How do you contact the people when the doors are closed? So although I was fortunate in being guided by a parent, uh, the struggle is real, and so I don't wish that many years on anyone.
Absolutely.
It's just I was ignorant to it.
Yeah, and so you know, there's various types of, you know, immigration pathways to the United States, and like I mentioned earlier, one of the most popular shows right now is 90 Day Fiance, and so I just want to kind of let's take that slice of things for right now in terms of somebody bringing either a fiance or a wife or a husband over. Can you think of maybe one of your clients from the past? We don't have to use names or anything like that, but have you ever been invited to a wedding or had a kid named after you because of the role that you helped play in you know, helping someone bring their loved one over?
I haven't had a kid named after me, but you know, but I do attend events. I had several years ago, and a Mexican American woman who met her fiance who was from Iran a long time ago, and that party, the commingling of the two cultures, you know, which are completely um, different and yet not so different, right? That merging was fantastic, and it's you know, it's interesting, it's fun. She went there for the very first. Well, she didn't go to Iran. They met at a different Middle East country, but that was fascinating for her. She would have never gone there if she hadn't met him. So that experience and sharing that with them was amazing. So yeah.
Are there certain areas of the world where it's much more difficult to bring a fiance or a spouse over from than others?
Yes, definitely. And we have a case right now where a young man from the Bay Area met a woman from Ethiopia, and he's gone back and forth to meet up with her. And in fact, they just had a child. And one of the complications of that scenario is, you know, A, COVID, but B, embassies closed, like what's going on in Ukraine right now, or what, you know, what's consistently in Afghanistan. The embassies don't exist there. And so they have to fly to a different country, different embassy to, you know, to move forward with their visa petition. So that complicates stuff. And so, yeah, there's some, so coming from Canada, right? Or coming from a lot of Western countries where the embassies are constantly open, makes it easier, you know. And it depends. Like, if you want to get an employment visa, it's more difficult from India or China than it is from, countries that don't provide a lot of employees from that country. So it varies, depends on what you're looking for. But that show is fun. My husband loves it. I'm always like, "Ugh, these people are crazy," but my husband loves that show.
Yeah.
Apparently, so do you.
Well, no, I admit I do love it. And, one of the reasons I love it is just everybody watching it can tell that the folks are completely mismatched. Either one of them is way more attractive than the other, or sometimes one of them has way more money than the other. Like we know that, but for the fact, like if they had both met in the United States, like they would not be together. But that being said, some of them find a way, a lot of them do not. And I think that for a lot of the folks watching, it's like watching a train wreck happening, and you just, you're at the edge of your seat. But I want to kind of switch gears and talk about how things might have shifted over the past year or so. Like obviously we've been in COVID, but in terms of the rhetoric that of the last administration, in terms of possibly being hostile to folks coming in, or folks from certain countries or whatever, in terms of the current administration, have you seen a shift in how visas have been processed and how applications have been processed with over the last let's say year or so?
The cog moves slow, right? So because you can't just, intentions might be better and rhetoric completely different, right? So even that's just easier on the nerves, right? But as far as actual movement, it's very slow because, any administration or any government, and I don't want to make excuses for the Biden administration. I think they can move a lot faster, but just overturning everything that the previous administration has done has been really slow. Like one of the biggest hurdles has been employment cards. I think there's a lot of news about that. Before they would take 45 days to maybe a couple of months. Now they're taking a year and a half. And when their expiration is, just the life of an employment card is 2 years, right? Let's say max. And then it takes a year and a half to process one. So really you have to begin the application as soon as you get it, but that's not the way it works. So people are being fired and stuff. And that was due to the previous administration's intent to, get in the way of people getting access to employment applications while in the United States. This is very separate from employment visas. That was slow too. So it's just complicated. Even if they want to move faster, they created a backlog that doesn't allow for movement. And so the rhetoric is definitely better, but in action, it's just tough. The courts are mismanaged, I think, and they have a lot of trying to undo anything is always difficult because instead of moving forward, you're just constantly trying to undo. And I think the previous administration did a fantastic job of creating hurdles.
And so when you have a new client coming to you for help, and let's just start with somebody who is trying, you typically get in the setting where you've got somebody who's coming over here for work or trying to stay here. What are some of the best case scenarios for somebody who maybe they have a work issue of whether they're trying to come here or whether they're trying to stay here? What is the best set of facts for that person in terms of being able to stay in this country, or maybe get on their path towards permanent citizenship? And I guess what I'm getting at is there a way for somebody who has started on a work visa to get on a path towards permanent citizenship?
Yes, I have two people in that exact same scenario. So actually what I do, I'll tell you more specifically what I do generally and then move on to this. What I do is a lot of asylum work and defensive and affirmative. And so what that means is when a person is unable to return to their country and they have fear of being persecuted in their homeland, so then they seek protection, and they can seek protection anywhere. But since I'm in the United States, we deal with persons who are here seeking protection from their country. So one of the applicants that I was dealing with was an amazingly brilliant engineer. And so he applied for asylum. He's from Ethiopia. He applied for asylum and then simultaneously also applied for an H-1B visa because he is an amazing engineer, and he got a job in Seattle. So his work permit processed, not work permit, excuse me, his work visa, employment visa processed a lot faster than his asylum application. And so then from that, he was working for 3 years on the H-1B visa, and then his employer decided to sponsor him. And so now he has a permanent green card based on his employment visa. And so in that scenario, earlier, I think we were talking about where does it go faster? There aren't that many Ethiopian applicants in H-1B visas. So his application went a lot faster than if he had been Indian or not Indian, but from India or from China. The backlog is different depending on where you're from. And so his application went by really quick, and he is now permanent resident. And he still works for that employer, but he's no longer beholden to that employer because his status is not based on his employer anymore. So
I'm sure from time to time, you encounter clients or potential clients who they want to stay here, but their visa has run out, or they're about to run out of time, and they don't want to go back. Is it ever a good idea to overstay your visa, just in general? I'll just leave it at that. Is it ever a good idea to overstay?
As a lawyer, as an attorney, I'm saying no. As a human, sometimes it's necessary and you don't have any other option. I might get in trouble for this if I ever apply for anything. But honestly, if you are from a country where you can't really return, but also there's no way to get, I feel like I should not say this.
It's okay. This is not legal. This is not legal advice for anybody listening. This is not legal advice. Yeah.
I'm not talking in my lawyer hat. I'm talking in my human hat right now. You have a family here and you have no one over there, but you don't have any legal ways of remaining here because maybe your family doesn't have legal status either in the United States. And so, situations create situations where you have to stay. It's not a good idea and it's not legal and you should not do it. But there is scenarios where it creates a situation where you have to stay, especially if you're sick or can't go back, or if someone in your family is sick. So it just makes it very difficult. But if there's any but if you're just joyriding here, don't do it, because the problem with that is it cuts off any rights to stay here in the future if you find a way to be here. So like if you can get an employment visa, like, you graduate with your degree and you have a potential and someone wants to sponsor you, or like Melania, you become a supermodel, and it cuts your options to being able to have permanent status if you overstay. So they're real dangerous to overstaying, so you shouldn't do it. But are there scenarios where it happens? Yes, we know.
Yeah, and so basically, if what I'm understanding is essentially like when people overstay, it really hampers their long-term ability to go through the correct processes and obtain permanent residence or citizenship. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, it's very fair to say yes, because if you overstay, it creates, exactly what you said. I don't think there's any need to repeat it. Yeah,
Okay.
it just, yeah.
And in terms of students, so the United States has wonderful universities, and I'm sure there are many students from all over the world who would like to come to the United States for college or grad school and things like that. Can you describe the process for somebody to obtain a student visa to come to the United States, and how does that process typically go? Is it usually successful, or are there lots of hurdles?
You know what? If you have the right credentials and you fulfill the requirements, I think that process is relatively easy, because it's a temporary visa. So so initially you have to get accepted by the university, right? Or by the college or by the institution. So it could be, when I said institution, I'm thinking of scam institutions. So, make sure that institution is not a scam, because then it's very expensive. So legally and financially are two separate things, because to come here as an international student, it's a great hurdle, because you have to take care of all the finances yourself, and it's more expensive than local person. So first it's state tuition, then there's non-state tuition, then there's international tuition. So it gets exponentially higher. But in terms of the visa, it's actually a very short process. So if you establish you're actually a student, you've been accepted by the institution, you can pay for the institution, and you have intent to study and go back, then I think the visa application is relatively simple. But also here, I think there's biases depending on where you're coming from. Someone coming from Europe who has the financial ability versus someone coming from Kenya who has the brains and the brilliance, but might not have the financial capacity. The question is, will you return back to your country, right? So now I'm like, well, maybe it's not that simple. Yeah, it depends on who you are and where you're coming from. But if you can establish you have been accepted the institution and can pay for it, and you can return back to your country, those are the three requirements.
And I'm sure a lot of people, they might have that intent, or they might say that is their intent up front. But you come here, you develop a friend group, maybe you have people that you want to stay with here. What is the process for somebody who maybe they came here as a student, but they love it here, they want to stay, they want to build a life here? Can you convert a student visa into permanent residency, or do you have to go through an entirely different process?
Well, it depends what you want to do. Like if you get hired, like that student that I was telling you, it can be converted from an F1, which is a student visa, to an H1B, which is an employment visa, to permanent. But, someone has to want to invest in you, and not a lot of companies can invest in you. Like yesterday, I had a phone call about a guy who wanted to come here and be a truck driver, right? Truck drivers, don't necessarily get invested in, right? Because you can hire someone here. And so that's a scenario where, you can't convert that too much, I think. But, someone who's, exceptionally brilliant. And I think he got hired by Microsoft, I want to say. That's why he's here. The guy I was telling you about earlier. Or they have, and we also have a doctor in the same situation. So those, high level skills, they can get converted rather easier than any other ones, where there's a saturation in American, like English. If you come here as a English professor, I don't think that's going to be converted to an employment visa. But if you come here on any of the STEM, I think you can get converted. The other is, life happens. You get married, you find someone, and depending on if you marry a U.S. citizen or a green card holder, if you marry a green card holder versus a U.S. citizen, the path is different. But life happens. People find ways to stay here. People do stay here. People overstay when they shouldn't. I have to emphasize when they shouldn't, because I feel
Yeah.
bad for what I said earlier.
No, it's okay. I think it makes, I think what you said earlier, it makes perfect sense. I mean, for the people who their long-term goal is to do everything the right way, you shouldn't overstay. But then there are times when it's a health and safety issue whether to go back home. And I think what it comes down to is that if you overstay, you also have to be prepared for the consequences of that. And the consequences of that is that you're going to upset you're going to really throw a wrench in your long-term plans. But maybe there's a difference between your long-term plans and what the short-term reality is if you go back home. And it's unfortunate that so many people exist in our society in a situation where they're in limbo, and they get worried if they get pulled over at a stop on the road, or if anything happens, heaven forbid. And it's just this constant state of anxiety, and it's unfortunate that so many people have to experience that. And I wish that there was an easier way, but ultimately I feel like our system in some ways does the best it can, but I'm sure as somebody who deals with this day in and day out, you're probably aware of, or you probably had conversations with people or thoughts to yourself of, there are ways that the system could be much better. And I'm just wondering if you have any kind of big picture suggestions or things that you see that could be demonstrably better in the way that our country handles immigration issues.
Yeah, you know what? I think one of the biggest ways is that, and we see this in everything, is if the parties, overall, the federal government didn't see each other as enemies, but as persons working for the benefit of the entire state. Because what that creates is a tit for tat. Some things are really simple, like the employment visa issue, or because we need farmers, we need a lot of people, we need a lot of workers. Right now we're saying there's shortage in persons. If you easily just made that process shorter, and you could do that, that's something that's easily done. It's just telling the office to make sure that things get processed on time, because right now we see that this current administration is trying to be more efficient. Okay, so you can intentionally clogging the system is one of the hurdles. I understand, and a lot of it has to do with listening to everyone's reaction about everything, right? And you don't need to have an opinion about everything. Some things just are a necessity. How to make our society, our bigger society, move forward without creating hurdles for everyone. And I think when you impact immigration, you impact the entire country as a whole, because no matter who you think you are, big picture, you might challenge what's being said without thinking about it, but everyone is affected by immigration, whether it's their loved ones or someone they work with or someone that works for them, so that they feel a personal affinity. And so I think just making sure things run more efficiently. I feel like sometimes, especially on a day-to-day, there is intentional work by opposing, not counsel necessarily, but the opposing I guess the government attorneys, to create hurdles. Okay, so if you're actually vetting, that's amazing. Yeah, vet, but don't create hurdles that aren't necessary in the name of vetting, because a lot of the times it's creating actual hurdles in the name of vetting. And so, yes, please vet everyone, but do it efficiently so that it works and not creates chaos. Because a lot of times that's it. The work is being done and it just is chaotic intentionally.
And so one of the things that happens is a lot of the folks that have access to be able to come to this country are some of the most talented folks in the world. We're talking about doctors, you mentioned engineers, people who have very particular skills that are sought after. And I'm just wondering how you feel about the ultimate the brain drain that's happening from you bring somebody like this country obviously can use doctors, we can use engineers, we can benefit from highly skilled people, but a lot of the countries that folks come from could also use those doctors, could also use those highly educated and skilled people. And I'm just wondering if you've developed any perspective on that, and what your thoughts are on brain drain.
I think about that all the time. I mean, like literally, I'm from East Africa, I'm from Eritrea. And most of my clients are from there, and they are some of the most brilliant people, and I'm always in awe at how amazingly brilliant they are, but how they haven't been given the opportunity, the space, the latitude to develop both as a worker and as a human being, and I said I do with a lot of asylum work because their government is assaulting them. Like, I'm not sure what, like, biggest in the news right now is Ethiopia. I mean, obviously Ukraine and Afghanistan, but Ethiopia is in the news. And what the people of Tigray did is they developed their country in the last 30 years. And then in about a month and a half or 2 months, their government destroyed their infrastructure intentionally, like their medical institutions, their hospitals, everything. And so I was thinking about that scenario with what's going on in Ukraine, specifically to the African students, right? And not feeling protected. And I feel as if our governments in Africa are not protecting the people. So when they can be developing the people, developing the country, developing the government, they are forcing their people to flee. A lot of people don't want to leave their country. My clients, in terms of asylum seekers, and I always say this: I would never leave the United States because I'm comfortable. I'm sitting in this chair talking to you, and I have autonomy as a woman in my 40s. And I think about who I am and who I could have been consistently and constantly. And I say, I vacation everywhere, but I'm not leaving the United States, at least not right now. And so when I think about that, and how the governments are intentionally forcing their people. So I don't know if it's a brain drain that we're creating, the United States is creating, or that their governments are forcing on them. Because I've never really heard of an asylum seeker saying, I want to be here because I have to be here, because I don't have any other option, is what I hear. And so I think it's unfortunate. And I don't know what the solution is, but yeah, I think the governments have to look inward.
Absolutely, because I think that there's levels to it. I mean, and I think it's easy for somebody like myself, who I've never been in that sort of crisis situation, to think of it of a somebody wanting to, a doctor or an engineer, highly skilled person wanting to come here to seek wealth in the United States, but it's not even that. It's even somebody to develop to their highest level of potential here, but it's not even that. It's really going down to the basic level of being safe, of pursuing a life where you get treated with fairness, and you have an opportunity to just to live a life where you're safe, you get treated fairly, you don't have to worry about how, like you said, the government is going to treat you, or you don't have to worry about things getting taken from you and things like that. And so there's a level of just of being able to live a safe and productive life. And so it's less about plucking people from certain countries, plucking doctors and plucking engineers and things like that. It's about that person themselves and their family of living a life that of meaning for themselves. And they're going to benefit people here. They're going to benefit people wherever they are. But ultimately, it's about allowing them to live the life that they want to live. And as you mentioned, when you look at assigning fault for brain drain, you can't fault that person for wanting to aspire to the life that they want to live. And ultimately, the flip side of that is you've got a lot of people who come here and then they support their families back home, or they send a ton of money back home. So yes, they might have come here and that country might have lost a doctor, might have lost an engineer, but they're also getting a tremendous amount of resources coming back into their community by virtue of the fact that somebody can have a successful life here and then maybe support folks back home. Has that been your experience?
Yeah, you know what? I had this conversation. I was in Dubai not too long ago, and most of the nurses there are Filipinas and Filipinos. And I was talking to them. I said, wow, there's a lot of Filipinos and Filipinas in Dubai, but in the States too. And I said, all of these were working at a very high level hospital. And I was saying, that's such a brain drain. Why don't why doesn't the government create a space for all of you to work there and just kind of develop and pay? She said, no, the government knows we return the money to them. She's like, I support all these people, in the Philippines. And we're not, you and I are not so brilliant that, we figured out something that no one else has figured out, right? The governments are well aware of that. But I think how, damaging to separate people, and instead of just, it's very simple, create a hospital in wherever and create a space for people to actually do what they want to do. And honestly, I think of the United States again, not everyone is a lawyer or a doctor here, but you don't see people fleeing, even people who just make basic money or, low income even, they stay here because at the core, they're not constantly targeted. People with money flee, people like I don't have a lot of wealthy people, but definitely a lot of highly educated. And, so in Ethiopia right now, actually a lot of wealthy Tigray people are clients right now. They're abandoning, most recently, I had these two kids and they're really young, they're college students and they were seeking asylum. And they were saying they were very down to earth. I'm actually very impressed. And so one day the kid says, my dad's hotel got confiscated. Right? I'm thinking, whatever. I Googled the hotel. It's a very 5-star hotel that's even, like just, and and then when he was talking in his thing, it said, I was pulled from the plane even though I had a first class ticket. Okay. I'm thinking first class ticket from Ethiopia to the United States. And, this child is, he's not lacking in resources, right? But he's lacking in peace of mind. His parents sent him here. And that's very true of a lot of Tigray Ethiopians right now, because, like I said, they spent 30 years building themselves and developing, and the government spent 2 to 3 months destroying them. And so in out of reality, people leave for safety because, Oakland, San Francisco, Richmond, there's a lot of people who don't have a lot of money, but they're not going anywhere. They're not going anywhere because at the core, they're not afraid for their lives the same way. And, obviously healthcare and all of that. And I don't want to minimize anything, but it's just different.
Yeah. So Haregu, you've been so generous with your time, but I just want to kind of leave on a high note. Can you think back in terms of maybe a client or someone that you've worked with that looking back, you felt like, wow, I'm so proud of the work that I did for this person, and I really helped them out of a tough situation?
You know what? All of my job. I've been doing this 12 years and I love my job. Honestly, I love my job because I do see, young people who came with nothing. Now they're truck drivers, truck owners, business owners, students, people with family, just there's so many people I'm so proud to be working with. And because of their drive, they are who they are, not because of what we did, we just, facilitated their path. They are who they are already. They were determined, they were successful, they were, and so I'm happy to do what I do, and I love doing what I do. So
that's a great place to end. Haregu, where can people find you if maybe they have an immigration issue, or they have a loved one that they're thinking about bringing over? Where can people find you?
my office is in Oakland. Thank you very much. And I'm at 427 Grand Avenue. And I can be reached at by just Googling Haregu Gaime attorney, Gaime. The phone number for the office is 415-533-4919. But also, if you just Google immigration attorney Haregu in Oakland, you can find me. I'm easily accessible. And thank you so much for having me. This was so much fun.
Oh yeah. No, we've been friends for a while, and I'm so glad that you agreed to come on the show. And I'll drop all your information in the show notes in the podcast. So thank you very much for your time, and let's do this again sometime.
Yes, please. Have a good day. Thank you, Nate.
All right, you too. Take care.
Bye-bye.